Hi.
Well.
Hello.
Hi. Okay.
I have to say, this is so exciting to meet both of you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, we're happy to be here.
Yes.
So if you both are ready, I could start the introduction and
Sure.
it's like that. Great. Fantastic. So hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Michael Grimaldi, the director of the drawing department here at the New York Academy of Art. And I'd like to introduce our co-host, Amaya Gurpide, artist and adjunct professor of drawing, also here at the New York Academy of Art. Ultimately, we have Amaya to thank for this amazing opportunity by reaching out to Roger and James. And so, as many of you know firsthand, composition, lighting, framing, and narrative structure serve a vital role in the training of visual artists. In addition to the study of Old Master and contemporary drawings, paintings, and sculptures to better understand visual storytelling, Amaya and I frequently refer to film, and in particular to the cinematography of Roger Deakins, towards developing a better understanding of composition and visual storytelling, so both in our students and in ourselves. So Roger Deakins is considered one of the most influential cinematographers in film history, is a 15-time Academy Award nominee and 2-time winner for films Blade Runner 2049 and 1917. His work has defined the films of the Coen Brothers, Mendes and Denis Villeneuve, among many others. And Roger's wife, James Deakins, is a script supervisor and longtime collaborator. And they recently started a podcast that we've just been enjoying so much, the Team Deakins podcast. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you both to this conversation, and our students and everyone in attendance. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's very flattering introduction.
Well, thank you, Michael. Roger and James, such a pleasure to have you here. I'm so happy that you said yes to come and spend a day with us at the Academy. Both of your work has been an enormous source of inspiration for us. And we, like Michael said, we've been enjoying so much commenting on all the episodes of your podcast and Team Deakins. They're highly recommended.
Oh, great.
Yes, plenty more to come.
Yeah, right.
I think we've already done another 80 that are ready to be published. So.
Well, they're not ready yet.
No, in the production.
They're a great company in the studio while we're painting and drawing. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
So for some of the people in the audience that might not know exactly what a cinematographer or a script supervisor are, could you please tell us a little bit about what it is exactly what you do?
Can I just say that I'm not a script supervisor anymore? I work with Roger as a team.
We met, James was a script supervisor on a film when we met. And then we worked on a few films where James was scripting and I was shooting. But nowadays, because, well, it started really because we were on different jobs sometimes and apart. So we started working together, and yeah, we basically do it together now. You know?
We come in as a team.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about script supervising because I know it.
I guess what we're interested is in you as a team and the kind of work you do on set, because we've been hearing you describing it, but I think that it will, I mean, through the Team Deakins and other interviews, but I think the students are so eager to hear about your experiences. And it's amazing to hear how you both are so connected that you kind of know what each other is thinking. And so
well, that's how it's worked, and we both love what we do. We both love filmmaking, and we love the process, and we just love film. So
we should probably say, okay, so it starts with reading the script. So you read a script, you see whether you respond to the script or not. You then meet with the director, if you like the script, to see if the director's got the same idea that you do, that you're on the same page.
Yeah, or if the director's vision of it, I don't like that word, but if the director's vision of the project is you know, one that resonates with you. That's the thing, because sometimes it might not be so.
Yeah. And then you start the process of prep, and during the process of prep, you're exploring the possibilities and the script, and you're actually starting to visualize, you're starting to figure out what it's going to look like.
Yeah, it's great. Well, Denis Villeneuve, I think, puts it better than anybody.
Yeah.
He says what he loves about prep is it's the one time he can dream. You know, you don't think about technique or the practicalities or the damn schedule, you know, how much time you have. You can just dream.
Yeah.
And I think that puts it really well, because, you know, after that, then it becomes much more a nuts and bolts process. Sure, you can be on set and you can have different ideas and you can be creative or whatever and spontaneous on set, but it's that prep period that really sets the whole mood, I think, of a film, you know, the whole direction you're going in anyway.
And I think that if you start by trying to figure out how you're going to do something, you're going to stymie, you know, the creative vision or whatever of the movie. For instance, on 1917, which, you know, on the front page said it's designed as one shot, Sam said to Roger, let's figure out what we want the movie to be first. And then afterwards, we had to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Which was not easy. But
well, it was hard to think about, you know, and it's always hard to think about something without those sort of technical constraints in the back of your head, you know, and especially with 1917, to just imagine where the camera would go and how it would, you know, depict the landscape or the environment with the two actors without actually thinking about how you do it physically and technically. That was kind of interesting, really, but that's what you try and do.
Yeah, you try and figure out where you're going first, what you want to achieve, and then you go back to the tools, because that's all it is. The technique is the tools. How are we going to create what we decided we wanted to?
And just, I'm rambling on now, but then also the decision in the prep period might be that you don't make a decision. It might be that you actually go on set and you do it totally spontaneously on the set, but you still have to make that decision to work that way, you know, so everybody understands how you're focusing on the project. And I was thinking very much in particular about a film, Jarhead, that I did with Sam. That is like almost the opposite in the way of working to 1917.
But at the same time, you guys did discuss what the story meant and what was important to get across in the story. You just didn't talk about how to do it.
Right, right. Yeah.
So the story is the core. Everything has to like be on the surface of the story. That's the most important part.
Absolutely, yeah.
Very much so, yeah. And also when you're telling a story, because you're going to shoot it out of order, you've got to figure out what you want the look to be, so the look doesn't go this way, then that way, then this way, then that way. So sort of having it all in your head ahead of time helps you when you get to a scene and it's like the end, but it's the beginning of the shoot, so you know where you want to go to.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important. I think, you know, the important thing about prep and conceptualizing something. It's not like, I mean, I love stills photography. I love wandering around with a camera and taking a photograph, but then that's one photograph. That photograph doesn't necessarily have to relate to the next one.
And it's one moment.
And you take one moment here, and then a week later you might take another moment, and they might be very different, and that's fine. You put them together and it says something. But if you do that in a film, you might take the audience out of that reality. So that kind of consistency over, you know, what might be 10, 20 week shoot, that you're shooting maybe the beginning of the film, at the end of the shoot, and the end of the, you know, I mean, it's a jigsaw puzzle, and you have to have that whole thing in your head so it feels like a composite whole, you know.
It's so interesting to me because I mean, one of the elements that all of your work has such a strong sense of style and aesthetic and just overwhelming beauty, but it never overrides that narrative. And I mean, I know as visual artists, we're all kind of struggling in some way with that. Like, I'm just curious, like, how maybe you think about making that kind of invisible in a way. Like, I found myself with 1917. I went in, and really so many of your movies, I watch it once, I have this profound experience where I'm completely immersed in the narrative, and then I stay in the theater and watch it again so that I can kind of look at the aesthetics anew.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because in a way, I mean, on 1917, obviously we had long conversations in prep about how to move the camera, and there's one very specific moment. I mean, the camera is usually with the characters in some way, and there's just one moment when Schofield gets knocked out in the lockhouse and he wakes up and it's night and the water's dripping and the camera goes out the window after the shoot with the German. The camera goes through the window, and we talked about that in prep, and we decided that we had earned that moment to do that with a camera, because it was also this a specific moment where the camera could become detached from Schofield in a way, because he was detached from reality. Suddenly he was in this surreal landscape, and it just heightened that sense of disembodiment, really. Is he dead? Is he now dreaming? You know, so you go through all those sort of conversations, but that shot would not have worked had we not, up to that point, kept to the rules and been with those characters and actually experienced it with them, you know, very, very directly. So it's exciting when you discover something like that. And I don't know who suggested it, but you look at each other and go, yeah, we can do that now. That's really interesting, you know. I mean, that's
great.
Oh, that's great. You were talking about technique before, and I think this is like really relevant for us, because in our art education, there's a lot of emphasis in technique, but there's also a lot of emphasis in especially at the academy, in communicating your passion and like making sure that visually and emotionally you are connecting with the viewer. But how do you find that balance between like that, you know, like the technique and the passion? Because I heard you before that another interview saying that you need to have that instinctual capacity to react to what is in front of you. How do you think one develops that instinct? Is that something that can be developed?
You know, I wish I could answer that. I really don't know.
Well,
I really don't know.
I think part of it is, and you have said this before, is taking the time to look around you, taking the time to bring things in, because once you've experienced something visually, you've got it in you, and then sometimes you bring it out again. So I think that's important.
Yeah, but you know, whether that capacity is sort of something that's inherent in somebody, or
not
I don't know. Was it because I spend a lot of my childhood, and I still do spend a lot of my time fishing on the ocean, and a lot of the time nothing's happening. I mean, you kind of watching the world around you and the sort of subtleties of light, and I don't know. Is it things like that that kind of inspire you to want to reflect that in a painting or a photograph, or for me in film? You know, I don't know.
Well, I think if you're walking down the street and you look down an alley, and because you are taking care to look around you, and you see a streak of light, and you say to yourself, why does that move me? What is it? And so you take the time to think about it. I think that's one way of training yourself. To think about what moves you, because that's the other thing, is a lot of people just want the answers. How do I do it? Do I put the light here or do I put it there? But it's something you need to find out yourself, that I don't like the light there, I like the light over here.
But you see, I don't know, because everybody's got an iPhone now and a camera. On our podcast, we've talked to two stills photographers who've been my kind of heroes over the years. One Alex Webb and the other Harry Gurriart. And it was wonderful just to get the chance to talk to them. And neither of them knew how they did it either. You know what I mean? It's like, but how do they do it? Nobody else takes photographs like they do. The composition, the use of color, the moment, how do they do it? I don't know how they do it. I wish I could.
Harry did say, find your eye.
Yeah,
I
find
just
your
finished
eye.
cutting it, so I
Absolutely.
remember.
Yeah. Find your eye,
Yeah.
which is what I'd say. You kind of got to find your way of seeing. But what
Yeah.
that really means, I don't know. Experiencing life, just being
Yeah.
aware of things
Yeah.
around you and not being obsessed
Yeah,
by
being curious with what is around you and
Yes.
open to what like the experiences that are around. Sometimes we
Yes.
also are in our studios like so confined, thinking like I need to make this happen, and
Right.
the day that you decide to take a break and go outside, and suddenly you hear a conversation and or you see something and it clicks, triggers that
Right.
moment of creativity.
But on the other hand, the painter who I most admire is Edward Munch. I mean, I just could stand in front of his paintings for days and week. And I don't know why it affects me so much, but look at his painting of the sick child, because it's not one painting. There was an exhibition in New York.
No, it was in Oslo.
Oslo.
Yeah, right.
No, but there was one in New York where it had variations of the sick child.
Yeah, I think it was Oslo
Oh,
because
was
it
it?
showed all his
And
different,
yeah, and over the years he painted the same composition, the same painting, but it was a
but
different
changed it
technique.
slightly each
And
time.
it was really interesting. And the last one was like almost like a Sidney Pollock drip painting with scratches, but it was like so angry. The man had changed his perception of this moment in his past and his reaction to it. And maybe he had embraced his anger at this moment. I don't know, but that's what it felt like on the canvas. It was like, whoa. And where does that come from? I don't know. I just find it was, yeah.
Yeah, it was really wonderful when we saw that exhibition because he painted a lot of his paintings, like the Scream, he painted
Over
many
and over,
times. Yeah. And to see his process was fascinating because sometimes you just think it comes out of people and that's the way it is. So it was really informative, I thought.
I think what he was saying is it was his way of trying to understand his own emotional reaction to something. And I think in a small way, that's what I do when I go out with a stills camera. I mean, I don't often take photographs, but sometimes something will really attract my attention and I don't know why, but it's just something that feels like part of me. And I think that's why certainly Alex Webb and Harry Greer are so great at what they do. It's an expression of themselves somehow. If that makes sense and it's not too pretentious.
No, it sounds amazing. I think also you have enough technique that you kind of, it's like second nature, that you know that you can work the mechanics to get to your ideas.
I think that's really important, that the technique isn't, especially in filmmaking, because we have so many tools, we have so many tricks, and now with, digital CGI work, and there's so many ways you can do something. You can do anything, but the point is, what do you want to do? And also that you don't want to be driven by the technique, I think there's very few, I don't like the word art actually, but I would use the word art in terms of painters, obviously. And, there's very few, for me, there's very few artists who paint what appears to be something very technical and yet can affect one emotionally. And my two artists I would mention would be Bridget Riley, who's painted some things that utmost technique, but you stand in front of them and go, why is that affecting me so much? Not just sort of physically in terms of its lines and color, but emotionally. It's very strange. And the other one is Frank Stella. And when I was looking at his work when I was a teenager, Frank Stella, I couldn't understand why it really affected me. It seems so simple and so technical, but it's actually, I find quite moving. I don't know why, because they're abstract images. So there.
So, and then kind of going back to something you were mentioning in regards to the preparation work, like if it's storyboarding, is it kind of, because it's something we also encourage our students to do a lot of, before and trying to kind of develop a sense, do you have the sustainability to go into this? Are you so interested in revisiting this subject matter, that you could really lend a lot of emotion to it. And so preliminaries are a big part of that. And sometimes they're referred to directly and sometimes they're just put away. And so is that kind of common practice for you to kind of very thoroughly storyboard and do the prep work and have mood boards and then just kind of forget all about it because it's so deeply etched in your mind to kind of free you up and be
Pretty
instinct?
much it, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, with the Coen Brothers are the only directors that I've worked with and know that actually religiously storyboard everything.
Yeah.
And it's very detailed. And we'll sit in a room for weeks sometimes. I mean, I did when I first started working with them on Barton Fink. I think it was like 5 weeks in a room just discussing the storyboards. But then when you get on set, you're not necessarily referring to them, but you do have them in your head, you know.
But it's been a great prep. And also the thing about it is when you get on set, you suddenly have some other elements. You have the actors that always bring something unexpected to it. You have the location that also might speak in a certain way.
Yeah.
So if it's a mistake I think storyboarding's great, but then to get on set and say, we have to do it this way because that's what's in the storyboard, because then you're not letting the other influences in to create what is the best way. Because that film is always changing. You think you know it in prep, then you shoot it and you see something completely different. Then it gets into the cutting room with hopefully an editor who has not been on set, who has a completely fresh eye, and then it's another different film. So you have to.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a process. I mean, I've only worked with one director once where we storyboarded the film. This was with M. Night on a film called The Village. We storyboarded everything and we shot exactly what was on the storyboards. And I don't know if it really worked. I don't know if it would have been better if we'd have been a bit more flexible. I think it probably would have been, but that's his style of working. That's fair enough, you know, so it's director's choice.
Yeah, it was amazing also to hear in one of the interviews how I don't know if it was for the Big Lebowski, but the Coen Brothers had this storyboard planned, and at the end, I think you were saying something that they only removed like 6 scenes out of that storyboard. Like they had their vision really clear from the beginning. Yeah, I wonder how do you do that, because you know, in our world, it's all about like for the ones that are hiring models, you have like that idea in mind, and you are bringing the model, you're setting the light, and deciding your composition, and then maybe you realize like your idea, your vision it doesn't relate to what is happening. But how do you keep that vision?
Yeah, I don't know. The Coen Brothers have a very particular technique, and it's quite unusual. I mean, they do storyboard. I think the film I was referring to was actually Barton Fink, the first time I worked with him. And there were 5 shots. There weren't scenes. It was 5 shots that we did that weren't in the film. And that was because in this sequence, in this corridor, the lift elevator or somebody gets his head shot off, but the effect didn't work, so they had to cut it out. So that's the only reason there's 5 shots missing. Otherwise, it's exactly as it was. But I think it comes from them working on very low budgets and having to be very precise of what they shoot. They also shoot very few takes, and they'll quite often do 1 or 2 takes.
But they're also open to whatever happens, because remember the high overhead shot in No Country for Old Men when he was strangling the sheriff, and over the takes, all this
scrapes on the floor,
which
shoe marks.
Didn't make sense in continuity, but it was such a wonderful image.
It was such a powerful image. We did a high shot. So I mean, there's still quite things change on set. I mean, in the storyboard actually kind of informs the rhythm of the cutting and the feel of the scenes and the rhythm really of the way it's going to evolve. But sometimes, and quite often, we get on a set and we do like a 2-shot of a conversation, and Joel and Ethan would look at each other and go, I say, well, shall we do overs or singles? And they look at each other and go, just shake their heads. I said, well, what do you mean? Well, we don't need anything. It plays really well in that shot. And then you think, well, that's amazing. Because
Right.
they have the whole film, and they write together, they cut together, and they have it in their head. So that's a very particular way of working, you know.
That's great. So I want to talk to you or ask you about color versus black and white or monochrome, because we have students here at the Academy that are painting and drawing majors, and it would be so interesting for all of us to know what are the differences in the way you compose and tell a story using color versus monochrome or black and white.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really composing for black and white, you know. I mean, for me, I mean, black and white is so much more about the content of the frame and the relationship of the light within a frame. And I suppose in a way, I'd love to be shooting black and white more than color, because color can be such a distraction. And that's why people like Harry Griot use it so well. But it's interesting, when he goes back and takes photographs of his family, he said he does it in black and white. He would never do it in color, because he says the black and white kind of connects with the people, the characters.
Makes it more about the face.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of true, really. I think with color in film, you're always fighting against the artificial kind of prettiness that the image has, you know. You're kind of trying to use it in the way that it would use black and white, and I was very aware of that, doing that in Blade Runner, and painting more with you know, even colors rather than,
Well,
you know.
Also because in the beginning we decided that it was this gray, awful landscape with pops of color.
Yeah.
So you were using the color every so often to accent something.
Yeah.
So that
I think the color is using color. It's a danger of being very distracting. But that said, Edward Munch used color really beautifully. So you know.
Like he keeps the simplicity, I guess.
Yeah.
But so how when you're altering the chroma or the saturating your palette, how do you know when the image will deliver the story versus distracting from it? Because I'm interested in that balance and knowing, like in some of the movies like The Assassination of Jesse James or Brother, Where Art Thou? Like that moment where you are like tweaking the chroma, like tweaking the temperatures and knowing exactly when not to overdo it.
Yeah, I have no idea. I don't know. It's just it is. It's an instinct, you know, that you think, you know, wouldn't it be great if the kitchen fluorescent was green and then the rest of the room is yellow orange or something? You know, you just kind of think, well, that would be a really nice punctuation. And I don't know, that's just how it happens, you know. I don't have a, I mean, some cinematographers I know do. Vittorio Storaro could talk about this in terms of mapping out psychologically why he uses certain colors. No way can I do that. I just kind of think, well, this would be really interesting at this moment in the scene, you know, for this particular scene. It would be nice to contrast the colors, to put something in that's kind of shocking or something. And then at other times, I want something to be much more quieter, more serene or something, and kind of envelop you, like, you know, the warm tones in the Wallace building in Blade Runner, all those kind of water patterns in the gold orange light. You wanted to sort of be, you wanted to be inviting. This is the character, a reflection of the character. This is this strange, inviting world that he's created, you know. So it's just something, I don't know.
So, and then a little bit more specifically, like in, let's say, the beginning scenes of 1917, there seems to be such a like color harmonic that really did remind me a lot of Munch, in terms of, it's almost like that steel blue gray versus the kind of sienna coloration. Like, so was that really kind of designed by you, and was that apparent in the set, or was that something that ended up kind of in the camera or something that ended up in kind of post-production. It's
We did
just
talk about
fascinating.
making
Oh,
it like England,
we
yeah.
talked about it a lot, about we talked a lot about how we were going to start the film. In fact, the opening of the film was slightly different. And Sam and I were talking about it for many, many weeks. And eventually one day he came and said, yeah, that isn't right, is it? You know, and so it changed to what you see, which is this bucolic landscape, you know, and we wanted, I mean, they're meant to be in France, but we wanted it to feel like England. We wanted to feel like this was home, you know, and suddenly, I don't know, you wanted to start with this wonderful bucolic landscape and then gradually get, you know,
In the trenches.
swamped in the trenches. You know, at one point we had, the camera was going to go and see the front line before the Schofield and what's the name got there. Blake got there, but then we thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we just pulled back with them really simply the whole way, and gradually they're immersed in this darkness, and suddenly, my God, we're in a trench. You know, it's like, it just became so obvious to us very late on that, no, you don't need to do a complex shot. It's just one shot pulling back, and just gradually this whole world changes from this wonderful, beautiful landscape to this kind of, you know, trench that's just so claustrophobic. So it's very much in, you know, working with Sam and working with Dennis Gassner, the designer, you know, the colors find themselves. And then, you know, when they first go into Eramore's dugout, well, it's going to be lit by what it's going to be lit by. Okay, they're electric, they're not really little candles, but that they represent what it would have been like, you know. So, you know, you're guided by the reality of what it would have been, but also that kind of visual, that visual sequence going from, you know, something that's, I say, a dream of home into this kind of nightmare. You know, it was a gradual build. I thought it worked really well.
Yeah, that's great. It just sounds like you are always really open to whatever happens that can actually, like, you don't see it as an impediment. You see it as something that can actually benefit the composition or the storytelling, and that's so incredible. Like if there's like something happening in nature, like there's a cloud passing, or you're always integrating it versus being defeated by it, and I think that's a great quality.
Right, but I've got to express it's Sam and it's Dennis and it's a whole crew of people. Yeah. So it's really a collaboration, and you swap ideas. And I say the idea of the shot being just a simple pullback came out of us just, you know, Sam and I scratching our heads and thinking, well, how can we shoot 360 and see it and come back? And then, oh my God, we don't need to, you know.
Yeah. And I remember that conversation in the podcast. Again, I forgot because I'm listening to all of them, but there was one in particular where somebody was mentioning that idea that when you are young and you are so like arrogant with your ideas, thinking that you know it all and you don't want to hear anyone because you have the biggest idea. And I think that, like, hearing you say and how much working in collaboration can make that idea bigger and better.
Yeah.
So that was something very important to remember.
Yeah, we've talked to a lot of cinematographers and directors and that on the podcast, and also over
in life
in general. And you know, there is a danger. You start out and anything's possible, right? You want to do it, and you've got an idea of how to do something, but it's not the way it's been done. I was especially. A number of people have said this, but it especially hit me when I was starting out in the UK shooting films. This is not the way it's usually done. Where is your backlight? You know, why aren't you doing such and such? And I go, well, why am I never learned from somebody else. You know, I kind of learned, I suppose, to see by myself. And so I don't use a lot of backlight. I don't see a lot of backlight, you know, but there was a pushback because this is the way things are normally done. And it's the same, like I've always operated the camera, but so many times it's like, No, we have to have an operator. You can't operate the camera. What are you doing operating the camera? You know, it's just like, you've got to stick to what you feel is your way of doing it, the way you see things. Otherwise, what have you got? You're just copying somebody else's, something you can't relate to. So you know that you have to keep that naive enthusiasm you have when you're a teenager. I think I've still got that. I'm certainly still naive, and I'm enthusiastic.
Oh, yes, you are.
Yeah, go up and down, but
Yeah.
Well, and that's the amazing thing for me too, is seeing how just diverse. You never seem to repeat yourself, and I think that's really, evidence of that innate sense of curiosity and ability to kind of change according to a story, but then also on the specific needs.
Yeah, but also I've been very lucky. I mean, working with the Coen Brothers, the films are so different. They're always suddenly set in a different world. So the approach is very different every time, and the same with Sam Mendes, and Denis. That's the three people I work with most, I suppose, of late.
But also,
and Mike Radford as well. When I first started out, I mean, first film we did was set in Scotland, in rural Scotland on a farm, and the next film we did was 1984. So it's kind of like there's a world of difference there.
And also, we choose carefully. We don't choose the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but it was like what we were saying before, though. Unless you could love a script, but unless you're turned on by a director and their enthusiasm for that script, then it doesn't mean anything. So you want to be in a situation where you feel the material is great, but it's going to be a great collaboration, a team of people that are really going to, it's not a job, it's actually
a passion.
It's a passion, yeah, and you want everybody else to share that passion, I mean, everybody, not just the key people, I mean, everybody. And we've always worked with a crew. Most of the time we work with, people we've known for years, and they share our passion for what we do, and when we don't have the chance to work with people we worked before, we make it damn sure that we find people that are equally passionate, because to spend, 10, 20 weeks with a crew that isn't giving their all for this project, then it's not such a good experience, really.
I imagine. So there was one of the episodes, again, I've been listening to so many, they're so great. So I love that episode because it was about composition, and you both were discussing this idea of composition and lighting, and one could, if one could be divorced from the other. And I love the way that you were bouncing back. It was almost like being with you in the kitchen, like listening, like your conversation.
Yeah, I don't see how you can divorce them, and that's personally why I like operating the camera, because it's those tiny little moves, those little balances in the frame that make so much difference, Yeah, I
Like if you can, I don't know, talk about like one of my favorite films was The Man Who Wasn't There, and like, wow, the shots in that movie, the frames, like they're so beautifully composed, and the narrative is like incredible. And because well, maybe you can talk about also about the fact that it's not black and white, and the process that you went through to get it the way you like it.
Yeah,
well.
I mean, it's not black and white. I suppose initially, the producers, the backers, said they wanted a color version because they were going to release it in color in Europe, or on VHS or whatever it was.
Because normal distribution contracts have that clause in it. You must also supply a color. It just is.
But in the end, when I did a load of tests, it became clear to me that I wanted to shoot on color stock anyway, because it was a finer grain and I could manipulate it with intermediaries to get the quality of the black and white I wanted. I wanted a silky kind of look. I didn't want it to look like an old film. I wanted it to look like a modern black and white film, but it was an homage in a way, obviously, to noir movies. So it all worked out fine in the end. I mean, it was a lot of technical experimentation to get it where we wanted it, but yeah. But again, as far as the look and the compositions, I mean, that's all about discussing the sets with Joel and Ethan, production designer, set dresser, and then all down to the gaffer and everybody discussing the look, and it's gradually sort of focusing in.
And costumes too.
Costumes and storyboards, the whole bit, I mean, right down to discussing, how thick is the veil on the lady that's outside the house who's seen spaceships.
Yeah, right.
I forgot her name. But
Turturro's wife.
Yeah, John Turturro's wife. How thick that veil is, how that's going to work in the light I was going to use in that scene, and all those things kind of have to be discussed, as you go along. The kind of practical light sources you have in a space, and even though it's black and white, the colors of the walls, how is that color going to relate on the black and white?
And sometimes you have ideas and you have to test them, because you have an idea and you think it's going to work, but it's best if you can to run a test with all the different departments that are affected too, because then you can see it and realize, oh, well, it didn't show up quite the way I was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things for me is the practical light sources that I have to work with. And often, I mean, I go through 10 or 20 different practicals till I find one, or the set dresser finds one that we're both happy with, And the other thing is shears on a window, curtains.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you're doing, scene where the street lights coming through the curtains, you want a certain quality of light coming through that curtain. You want a certain pattern. Well, is that a floral pattern? Is it a grid pattern? How thick is it? How thin is it? What's it look when it bunches up? So it might seem like a silly, inconsequential thing, but actually has implications especially in The Man Who Wasn't There. There's about 6 scenes, I would say, where I'm using that effect,
But of course, the production designer has also strong thoughts about the look of the shear.
Absolutely.
So, it should have a pattern on it or whatever.
So, exactly.
So it's a lot of back and forth.
Yeah. Everybody's got to be
on board.
Sign on for the way it's going to look. Yeah. But that's the fun of it, that the collaboration is the fun of it, because, people come with ideas from anywhere, like, I worked with the same dolly grip for about 30 years and he's retired now. And, but sometimes we would be doing a shot and
he's great. Yeah.
He's so fantastic because he knew the script so well. He'd suddenly say, Roger, why aren't you just pushing in there? Or why don't we slide left? Or why, just little things.
Or even, why didn't she pick up the key when she walked out the door?
Right,
I mean, he really was watching.
Yeah, and so it comes from everybody. Once, you want that collaboration. You want everybody involved, That's
why it's called Team Deakins.
Yeah, really.
And so we're actually getting a bunch of really interesting questions coming from our students and faculty. Do you mind if I start?
No.
Sure. Some of those.
Go ahead.
Jed, are you there? Jed Smith? Yeah. Okay. Well, his question. We talked about this in class yesterday, actually. In the novel True Grit, the novel True Grit captures the language of the Western frontier so well. The cinematography from your adaptation of the story is firmly of the same caliber. How do you prepare for this? How did you prepare for this film, and what other sources did you look at when deciding on the visual language of this movie?
Well, that comes down from Joel and Ethan were writing the script, and I don't know if they were intending to direct it. I think they were writing it for somebody else. But they always thought that they loved the original novel, but they didn't, that the other film with John Wayne in it didn't really adhere to the novel strictly. and they wanted to go back to the original story and basically do justice to that story. And then I guess then they decided to direct it when they liked their own script. And so that's where it came from, really. It was an idea of getting to do something more authentic. Although it is still a child's story, it is once upon a time. So it's still got a certain kind of, kind of children's book fairy tale quality to it, I think. But it still wanted to be based in sort of reality, you know.
Have some grit.
So yeah, have some grit. And, you know, especially certain sequences wanted to be quite brutal, in fact, you know. So you have an ideal of where you're going to shoot and what you're going to do, and then you have a reality of the kind of budget. And we realized quite early on we had to shoot it in New Mexico, based out of Santa Fe. So then, you know, we spent weeks and weeks scouting everywhere, trying to find the best options for the locations. And, you know, you stand on a location and maybe Joel will go, yeah, well, this works, doesn't it? And then Ethan will go, well, maybe that doesn't work. And I'll go, I don't know how I can light it, or it's facing the wrong way. You know, you have all those conversations, and eventually you come to a mutual agreement, which is what offers you the best options. It might not necessarily be your ideal, but it gives you the best options out of what are available, you know? And then you've also got to take into account that, you know, you're moving from one location one day to another one, maybe the same day, a split day, or maybe just the next day. So all the trucks and everything got to move overnight. So, you know, you have to take all those sort of logistical things into consideration, you know. So that's how it kind of works, really. It's not, certainly True Grit, I don't remember us ever looking at an image, and we certainly never looked at the John Wayne film. You know, it was like, it was really storyboarding it, looking at locations, discussing the costumes and everything down to, you know, a week or two before we started shooting, Jeff Bridges trying to figure out which hat was more his character. You know, it's all those little things take a while just to sort of develop, you know.
And had you read the book before the screen?
Yeah, I read the book years ago. Yeah. I read it again, yes, after. I read it again after I'd read their script, I think, just to get, because it's always good to get all the background details, I think, of something that's based on a novel. I did the same. You know, Jesse James was based on a wonderful, wonderful book.
Yeah.
You know, a historical kind of reflection of who the character was. And it's so much in the book informed that kind of world and the mood of the piece. And, you know,
I think it was important to read the book also of True Grit because the movie was so not good. Yeah. The original movie. So you needed to know what they saw.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it when I saw it as a kid, like, but it's a different kind of movie, isn't it? You know, it's a different kind of movie. It's hard to say it wasn't good, but it in its own terms, it was probably good. But it looks of its time right now, you know.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about like how incredibly resourceful you are when composing with light and altering all the light fixtures and making holes in the ceiling to get or create cutouts to create like some kind of light pattern, like in the case of the interrogation scene of the man who wasn't there. Can you tell us, like, because it was a great story about why you did that, and I would love to hear again.
Well, I mean, sometimes you've got to figure out just technically how you're going to light something. And I remember one time on shooting 1984, very early in my career, I suppose it was my fourth film maybe. And we were in this sort of bunker in this big abandoned building and a low concrete ceiling. And you think, well, this is a mess hall. You've got all these people in there. So you think, well, how the hell am I going to light this? You know, you can't put fluorescence up. That wouldn't look right for the film, you know? So what would it have? So I asked them to cut holes in the ceiling. There's this great big 2-foot thick concrete ceiling, you know? So they came in and I thought, this is amazing. This is amazing. I can ask for this and they're actually going to do it. The construction manager went crazy, but he said, yes, if you want it, Roger, we'll do it. But it was like, so it's a kind of reality thing. How are you going to do it? Okay, well, if we cut holes, then I can have these circular pools of light, which looks slightly retro because the building they're in, but also slightly futuristic, which, you know, felt right really with that film. But you get back to the man who wasn't there. The man who wasn't there in the jail cell. Well, the idea, I think it was Ethan's idea originally, that it was the conversation, right, is about reality and the nature of reality and the uncertainty principle, right? So Ethan felt it wanted to be theatrical. You know, so that was the idea of this big beam of like almost a spotlight. Was it a spotlight or is it a spaceship? Yeah, you know, it is this kind of world. It's like, yeah, this guy's rabbiting on about whether we exist or not. So you got to take it somewhere else. You know, so that's where that came from.
That's great. And another one from an alum. In your conversation with Ron from Kim Power, who's a recent graduate. In your conversation with Ron Prince, a British cinematographer, you touched upon the notion of world building. Could you describe where you draw your inspiration from that helps you to envision and embody the world that you're constructing?
Well, I mean, again, it comes from discussions with a director, and the script sometimes is embodied those ideas. But then, you know, I mean, take Blade Runner, for instance, which is obviously a world outside of reality further than any other film I've done, probably. Well, we spent many weeks going through the internet looking at different buildings, look at different architecture, the way light falls in a space. I looked at a lot of James Turrell's work, look at different people's work about, you know, what light, and then what felt connected to this world. How could I make those shifts between the exterior, like James was talking about, the dark clouds and the gray exterior, and then different points of color in different places. And then, you know, Danny and I were talking about what was Las Vegas like now. Well, in Los Angeles, we had it gray and snowy. And he said, well, I think, what if Las Vegas was red? So there'd been a few years previously, this dust storm in Australia that created this amazing red storm around the Opera House. Well, I got images of that, and I got images of the Hubub from Egypt, which I'd been in, and it immediately came to my mind of the redness of the dust of the Sahara. So that's where that Las Vegas red dust came from. And then for like the interior of Wallace's room and all that water reflections and all that, I was just playing with reflections on water, because at one point Denny had said, I think Wallace's office should be a pond with a platform in it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What can I do with the water? And I was just playing with a lamp and water and just seeing what I could do and if I liked it, you know. And so it's a combination of, you know, that. And then Denny and I spent a couple of weeks scouting in London and then in Hungary and Slovakia, looking at different buildings, you know, brutalist architecture and stuff. So the whole thing just gradually sort of builds up, you know?
Yeah, prep is just a long time of talking.
Yeah.
And you're talking, well, what if we did this?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that wouldn't really work. Well, what if so in a way, it's such a relief to come to the end of prep, because you're not talking about possibilities anymore. You're just going to do it. And after that day of shooting, that's the way it is. And you can move to the next one. But
as Danny said, that is the time you dream. You know?
Yeah.
And you know, anything goes. I mean, things change, but I'd say that's what it is. You build up a whole series of references and ideas, and then gradually focusing on and ones that seem
Yeah.
to resonate most.
It's actually really interesting to see how you start, the concepts you start with and the concepts you end with. It's really
Yeah.
interesting to see
Yeah.
that sometimes.
I mean, it was on the assassination of Jesse James. It was interesting because we had a production space in Edmonton, in Canada, and in Calgary, was it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, maybe, I can't remember now. But there was a big hallway,
Yeah.
and both Andrew and I would be getting images, and Richard Hoover, the art production designer at that time, would be getting images that we liked, and we would get together and talk about them, and then we would pin them on the wall, each image which referred to a certain scene in the film.
Mm-hmm.
So the time we came to late pre-production, you could walk down the corridor,
Yeah.
and every scene had images reflecting it till you got to the end of the movie at the end of the corridor. It was really interesting. I'm not saying that we stuck to it religiously, but it gave us a feel, a really strong sense of where it needs to be, you know, more brutal, and where you brought in some poetry and some melancholy, and where it could be more colorful, and, you know, it was really interesting.
Yeah, that was an incredible film. I really love what you did with the aesthetic and the way that their images that are like blurred in some areas, and the colors are like degraded, and is really interesting. There was actually a few scenes in the dark where I used for my composition for my class in composition, where you could compare them with Velázquez or Caravaggio, and then it almost the rhythm in which the image was composed, it kind of like reminded me so much of that painting of Velázquez of the old woman frying an egg, and it was like it was almost like you use it as an inspiration, and you might not, but it was so incredible to see like the parallels that we can find there through history.
Yeah, you can say that, but all right, I'm going to say it now. I'm not a big fan of Velázquez or Caravaggio, but I'm sorry. No, Edward Munch, that's about it, really. No, there's quite a few painters I like, but I'm not that era, really. I love the Dutch masters, but I don't know. You know, the thing about the thing about Assassination of Jesse James is a bit like Kundun. We were so lucky to work on films like that are kind of, they're not just a literal linear story. You know, they're like tone poems. It's like if you read the book Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, I mean, it's all about the minutiae. It's about the feeling of the world. It's about the feeling of how Jesse James' eyes are granulated, his sight's granulated. It's about the place of the human being in a wider space, in a wider world. It's really interesting. The same with Kundun. It's not just about what's happening in that room, you know? So you got a chance to, and the film demands that you do something that is a little bit more abstract, I suppose, in a way, you know, a bit more expressive in images and color that are not directly leading the story.
That's amazing.
Makes sense.
I was thinking the True Grit courtroom scene. Wasn't that a Dutch painter inspiration?
Yes, probably. I can't remember who though.
Yeah.
Frans Hals, maybe. I don't know.
Talking about the True Grit courtroom scene. It was some Dutch painter.
Yes, probably.
The Goldfinch, what was it, the movie, The Goldfinch?
The Goldfinch? Oh yeah, that was a very specific painter, but the painting wasn't really related to the film. Look at the film. So we, you know, one obviously was trying to hint at that sort of feeling of the Dutch painters, but
Well, Roger and James, we're at the 1 hour mark. We would probably, if left to us, we'd keep you for another 6 hours.
Well,
not quite that long. We
can stay a little bit longer.
That was so great.
Please
Do you have any more questions, Michael?
Yeah,
from-
we have another one from Amy Liu, and let me get my glasses on, sorry. In visual storytelling, characters are oftentimes the focus, but as an artist, I find it sometimes restricting when I consider the figure as the top of the compositional hierarchy, because when everything else becomes just a secondary framing device, I start to adhere to repetitive compositions where the figure character is the mere focus. How do we approach everything within the frame with an equal amount of sympathy and yet still establish enough attention to the character and the story? Super interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think that's really hits the nail on the head why so much work at the moment in films and television looks the same. I go back to other filmmakers that whose work I really love and inspired me when I was much younger. And like, you know, obviously for me, Michelangelo and Antonioni and Andrei Tarkovsky and Jean-Pierre Melville. And I think you look at their work, yes, it's about character, but it's also about that character, that space, the character within the space, the human within the environment. I find, I think that's really important, you know.
Andrei Zvyagintsev.
Andrei Zvyagintsev, yes, the Russian director who we had the pleasure to talk to not so long ago on our podcast. I mean, his films, Loveless, Leviathan, The Return, and what was the other one? The Banishment.
Yeah.
I mean, that just masterful storytelling, which is, and all his films, Elena. Well, Elena's one of my favorites. It's about a maid. It's really a character study, but you see her in a world. I mean, it's one of the most visual masterpieces of film in the last 20 or 30 years, but it's really about one old lady. You know, so you can do it. It's not just, okay, we're in a medium close up because we got this dialogue and we cut on the lines, you know. I mean, we've been lucky. We've worked with directors that understand that they want to use they want to use the environment and the character to tell the story.
So is it about bringing into the frame things that also support what the character's going through? In other words, if you just put a tree in there, it might not work.
Right, it's about connecting the space, which is what Andrei Zvyagintsev does so well. He connects the characters to their space, you know, and you think his first film, The Return, which is the father and the two boys on the island. I mean, it's like amazing. It's like a study of three characters, but it's all about this world they're in, almost like in this surreal landscape, like almost like a Tarkovsky film. I mean, that to me is real cinema, you know. I mean, it can be two people in a room, sure, you know, and that can work as well. But I love the cinema that connects humans to the wider world, really, I suppose.
And I guess achieving that simplicity is so important, and not, I mean, trying to like remove all the unnecessary elements, especially if they don't serve to the story, right? And that must be difficult. I don't know if you think about like how much information or details you're adding so that image is retained by the audience. So
Right. I think you can overdress things.
Yeah.
I don't know why. We were just talking to somebody yesterday. A scene in Jean-Pierre Melville's Army of Shadows came to mind, where there's this young resistance fighter who's betrayed the resistance movement, and he's taken by these two guys to this sort of empty house in the middle of outskirts of town, and they sit him in a chair in this room, and the room is absolutely empty. It's like three little windows, a chair. He sits in the chair, and these two guys stand there and decide how they're going to kill this guy, this kid, this young guy. And most of it's played in this wide shot. And we can't shoot him because the noise of the neighbors will hear. So how are we going to do it? And one goes to the kitchen and finds a garrote, you know, like a cheese wire for cutting cheese or something like that. but it's just so cold, and it's more tense than any film with like 100 scene with 100 cuts and camera movement. It's just there. You cannot escape this room. There's hardly anything in it. It's just so simple, but it's so effective. It's actually quite heartbreaking and shocking, but also very real. You know, I think there's a lesson in that kind of thing. You know, that film is, well, it's like, I suppose, painting and everything. It's like again, Edward Munch, he's painting the same picture, but it's not just what's in the frame. There's something else coming at you, and that's what Melville can do and Tarkovsky could do. You know, there's something there that you can't put in writing, you can't describe, but it emotionally affects you. You know, that's I think what you, at its best, that's what you're trying to do in film. I think what anybody's trying to do in film. That's what makes film instead of a book, instead of reading a book, you know, or going to the theater.
And it's something unteachable also. It's something
I think it is. Yeah. It's, yeah. I don't know what it is, but you know when it's there. You know, you sit in the dark and watch a movie and you start crying and you think, God, why? It's not in the lines. I don't know this person. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's I see that in like what Michael was saying before, that you watch your movies and then you get hooked. I mean, your collaborations, I say, and then you are hooked with that feeling, whether it's a visceral feeling or like, you know, the Big Lebowski, like that trippy, you know, like being like kind of in like his paranoia or like his like the drug dream, and it's like it stays with you, and you feel like you want to watch it over and over and get to that feeling and kind of rejoice in it, and I think that is that, you know, that quality to be able to get there, to be able to like communicate in such a level that you get the people, the audience hooked to you. That's great.
It's interesting. I've often tried to talk to Joel and Ethan or Denis, you know, about, okay, why does this have this effect? Why does this seem? Why do you do this? How does this? Why does it affect me the way it does? And they, I don't know. You know, I haven't really heard any filmmaker. You know, when we was talking to Andre about in Elena, the maid is traveling on a train, right? And she's got this money in a purse that she shouldn't have and all this. And she looks out at one point and there's a dead horse. The train stops, then it starts moving. She looks back and there's a dead horse.
White horse.
A dead white horse that these soldiers are dealing with on the track behind the train, and it sort of disappears. And you read film comment, and I read once, and it said, yeah, the dead horse symbolizes coming on again, all this stuff. And so we asked Andre, okay, I want to know, is that horse just a dead horse? And why is it a white horse? Or does it mean something else? He said, I suppose it means something else, but I just thought it would be good to have a dead horse.
Well, and also he said, and I wanted it to be white so it would show up against the ground.
He said it had to be white because we realized the dark horse against the tarmac road wouldn't show up. So we made it a white horse. So sometimes a horse is just a horse, you know what I mean? But it still has, for other people, a greater meaning. And it probably did for Andre, but it was a sort of subconscious choice to do this that resonated. I don't know, you know?
It's always interesting to read critiques of movies that we were on, and they say, oh, well, yellow was chosen because of this or that. And, you know, yellow was just chosen because it was there, you know, and it seemed right.
It's funny sometimes, you know. It's so much is instinctive. It's, you know.
That's great. And another one from Amy Hughes. Hi, Amy. Both of you talk a lot about creativity being very intuitive. To what extent did your training and education affect your creative process?
I don't know, really.
Like, so for instance, like, do you feel that you develop that that instinctual response from your experience, from, you know, your previous experiences, or in a way, are you just kind of going in so fresh and it is just kind of a gut response, or is that trained in you through those experiences? I don't mean formal education necessarily, but
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that because it's certainly not formal education. I mean, I think
Doing it.
I think doing it, yes, but I think since I was a kid, I was reacting against things rather than trying to find a way of, you know, I was much more reacting against normality, I suppose. So instead of taking the course that my father wanted me to take, I went to art college, for instance, which was like, really, you know, and then after that, you know, I went to film school, and I don't know, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I say it was much more reactive, but I think it was at film school I kind of discovered something that I really fell in love with, you know. But again, I think it's experience, like James says, you know. Yeah, it's certainly not. I mean, in that sense, I didn't have formal education like that, you know. I mean, I don't think you can teach it, I suppose.
And I
yeah,
think that when you do it, if you try something and it may not turn out the way that you thought, but it turns out a different way, and you can recognize that, then that's a new way of expressing yourself. So
Yeah.
the more that you do, we always tell people, go out and play, you know, take your camera and play.
Yeah.
Because you can't get it from books. You just got to see it, do it and see it.
Yeah, yeah. I spent a year working as a stills photographer for an art center, and I've always had a great regret that I didn't make more of it than I did, but it taught me an enormous amount. I didn't really produce much, but it did teach me an enormous amount about myself. And, you know, it's just things like that. It all builds up. You know, I shot documentaries for a number of years, and just that sort of life experience, I think, obviously you take it with you. And yeah, all the things you've done, experience, that it builds up. And I don't, as I said, I don't think it's about a formal education. It's about experiencing life and having some reaction to it, I guess.
that's great.
I don't know, it's difficult, isn't it?
So
I guess
when
that's why. Oh, sorry, Michael.
no, go ahead.
No, that's. I was gonna comment on that because I guess that's why, Michael, you and I we're starting to look into other ways to kind of like find inspiration to our work through film and photography, and we found you.
Yeah, I love looking at the work of different photographers. I find that really inspiring, because, you know, that there's not that many great ones, but when they're great, they're really great, you know, and they have such a personality. You see people's work that has a personality, and that some of the great cinematographers I've admired over the years, like you know, Conrad Hall, American cinematographer Conrad Hall. I mean, you can tell his work, but it's also different, and that he was always a big inspiration for me.
When you're taking still photographs, do you use color? Do you use black and white? Do you use any combination, whatever suits you, or at the moment?
I've started taking one or two color photographs. I haven't taken many photographs for years, but now and again I'll go out with a camera, and I've started taking a few color photographs only in the last year or so.
Which are
Couple of
great.
years.
Yeah, I love what you're doing.
Yeah,
with
I
the
don't
colors.
know. I was always very much a black and white man, you know.
But you know, when you're talking with Harry and
Yeah,
Alex that are so amazing in colors, you got to go out and try it.
Oh, you got to try and do what Harry can do. No way, but
Yeah.
at least you can try.
We have another question from Maggie McGregor. No Country for Old Men has so many iconic takes. The boot scene you discussed earlier, the villain drinking a glass of milk, many more. you ever find yourself going over the top or overemphasizing too many scenes? In my compositions, I always struggle with allowing certain things to be more important than others.
Yeah, it's interesting, but you know, the kind of thing is going back to the whole conversation about filmmaking being a collaboration. You know, sometimes you might suggest a shot to a director and the director will say, well, no, that's a bit ostentatious, or maybe the other way around. You know, the director will suggest, why don't we do this? And you go, well, why are you moving the camera? Why don't you just sort of do it as a wide shot and let people move in and out frame? You know, so you kind of censor yourselves. One censors the other. Once you've got a kind of feeling of the overall film, you know, then the idea is that yeah, you kind of you guide each other like that. So yeah, it's hard not to get carried away with something that's very beautiful, like that might not be relevant, or a wonderful composition. And sometimes I do find myself thinking, well, that's a really lovely shot, that's really brilliant. But just because it's brilliant doesn't mean it fits the movie, you know. And I certainly have at times pointed the camera away from something that I thought was really special, but for other reasons. You know, it's tricky. I mean, my general way of working is strip things away, you know, make the frame as simple as possible. You can always put them back. But I personally love simplicity. And unlike looking at a photograph, Alex Webb's photographs, which are so complex and so full of intricate patterns and colors, you can't really do that on a film because the film image is not there for very long. The audience can't sit and study it. They only have a brief moment, and especially with a lot of mud and cutting, they have a very, very brief moment to see that particular frame because they've cut and suddenly you're onto something else. So there is a balance, you know. Sometimes if you know a shot is going to be held for a long time, when you work with someone like Denis Villeneuve, you know that shot is going to hold. He's not going to shoot coverage. That's it. Then you can maybe make it more complex. So you can add little nuances and stuff because the audience will then sort of see it. But it's a different medium than a painting or a still photograph, you know, very much so.
I guess you have to achieve that simplicity and then try to stay with the focus. And at the same time, if you add too many details if you make the image too interesting, you might lose the audience in that image and then lose the narrative. So I guess it's that balance of knowing how much you're keeping and when you're like putting too much of yourself, or I guess I don't know how you think about that, but how much you're trying to create something too beautiful that
you're maybe stretching it too far because you're seduced by some superficial sort of beauty or something. I think I start off with simplicity, really, both in simplicity, both in what's in the frame and the way the frame is lit, really. I just remember reading James Wong Howe, great cinematographer, who said right before he died, he said he'd been working all his career to kind of, you know, reduce how many lights he used. He was lighting a set for Funny Lady, I think it was the last film he shot. He said, I'm down to 10 lights now. I would have used 40 or 50 on this scene earlier in my career. I'm down to 10. I just wish I had enough time so I could get down to one light. You know, I thought that was really informative in a way, because you're trying to sort of whittle it down to what's really essential, you know?
Yeah.
You know?
And a question from Jordan Sokol, one of our faculty members here. How do you feel that composition or visual storytelling in film has changed over time?
Well, yeah, again, well, it's films in general. They seem to have split, really. I mean, so many films you look at now and they just look the same, you know, in terms of composition. The character always shot in close up in the same composition with a similar eye line, with the same kind of lighting pattern and a few pretty colors. And
subtlety is
sadly, sadly, subtlety is gone. And but there are still films being made where, you know, people are trying to use the frame and they're trying to use color and composition to help, you know, inform the story and create a mood. But I don't know. I don't want to be too negative. But again, you know, you look at what Andrei Zaleshinsky does in Russia, and you know, and there's a few other there's a few other filmmakers as well around the world. I wouldn't be totally negative about it, but it's, you know, I would go back again to looking at Jean-Pierre Melville and Andrei Tarkovsky and, you know, Kurosawa and the way they composed and their shot development, and I think we've lost a lot, actually.
Well,
I think you've bummed him out.
Yeah, sorry.
No, but do you think that it's kind of an urge, because I guess that some filmmakers are kind of following recipes, or are they just kind of concerned exclusively with a kind of aesthetic design over how that would contribute to the narrative? Or
Visual effects.
I think as budgets get bigger and bigger, there's more and more pressure to make the day. And then it also becomes about the actor. And okay, so we have to feature the actor, make the actor look good. And so make a light that works, you know, takes away the wrinkles. So it's all these other considerations instead of telling the story. Yeah,
I mean, there's also the pressure that the big budget movies have to be sold worldwide. So, you know, they almost, that almost demands that they have a certain uniformity to them, I suppose, in a way. Then the other pressure is that I think there's a pressure from studios to shoot a lot of coverage so they can change the pace, the rhythm, the kind of balance of a scene within a film. You know, they don't want to be stuck with a wide shot that covers a scene and nowhere to go. You know, that they really react against that. I mean, so many times, you know, I mean, I usually work on films where we shoot single camera. I mean, yeah, we use 2 cameras or sometimes 11 cameras if it's a big effects stunt or something. But generally, I work on a 1 camera shoot. That's not the norm. Not in America now. I know it is in Europe still, but it's not in America. You know, the bigger films, it's multiple camera coverage, and it is coverage. It's not considering what is the shot that really tells the story for this particular moment. It's a different way of, I in a way, I'm not criticizing it. It's just the way it's gone, you know. But I was brought up with a certain kind of filmmaking and a certain love of a certain kind of filmmaking, and I'm certainly not going to change now, you know. I mean, you wouldn't see Antonioni shooting with 6 cameras and then finding the scene in the cutting room, you know. And I love that idea that you have this concept and you find a shot, and that is, you know, that's the shot. It's something personal. You're making a personal statement with that shot. I mean, the director, I'm not saying me, but that's the director is doing in telling that story. That's why I love being part of a director's, a director's vision. And I hate the word, but it is a director's vision, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess that's the big difference from watching a movie that is just something to consume and it's just something to like easily please the viewer versus something that you create to engage with the viewer at a completely different level, and you care for and you create every single detail, and that's what is engaging with people. That's why we're here, like having this conversation right now, because we are so moved by that, you know, and it gets to us, and it's something that we're trying to teach our students and ourselves also, like how to create works where there's some kind of mystery, where there's some kind of like hidden story, something that really strikes the viewer and wants to come back to you for more.
Yeah, and I think I think it's always been in Hollywood that, you know, like a director, like a European director has made a great film in Europe, and then they grab them over and bring them to Hollywood and give them a big movie to direct, but they don't want them to direct it the way they wanted the director would do. You know, they want a product, and they almost suppress the personality that director's got, you know, and it didn't really happen in the 50s, and that you could see like the Fritz Langs and would come to Hollywood and make amazing movies, Orson Welles or whatever, and I think they were more celebrated for their sort of personality as a director, if you like. I don't see that so much now, I must say. I might be talking rubbish, I don't know, you know, but.
Well, Roger and James, thank you so much for joining us. You've really been a huge inspiration to, I mean, so many people across the world, but us in art school in particular.
Do we get to see any of the art?
Sure, you could. We'll send you some links and things like that.
Okay, that'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you for being so warm and for agreeing to do this. I know that you might be extremely busy with your lives and your profession.
Not really.
Oh, yes.
On our podcast, James is very busy, I must say. Yeah. No, we good. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, Reese, for making this happen.
Yeah. Yay, Reese.
Yay, Reese.
But thank you, guys.
Too, for
it was a real pleasure.
Yeah.
It was such a pleasure to meet both of you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care of yourselves. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.